Dear students, here we will discuss about pollen grain, right? So what is pollen grain? Clear? So pollen grains, remember, pollen grains are the structures having 2 cell or 3 cell produced by the meiosis or produced by the process of meiosis in pollen mother cell. That means inside the microsporangium, the pollen mother cell undergoes meiosis to produce microspore. Each of the microspore develops to pollen grain, and each pollen grain consists of either 2 cell structure or 3 cell structure. Clear? So let us discuss what are these 2 cell or 3 cell structure of pollen grain. So here you see this is the structure of a pollen grain, which consists of the cell which consists of 2 cells, right? One large cell inside which a small sized spindle shaped cell is floating. This small sized spindle shaped floating cell is known as generative cell, and the large cell is known as tube cell or vegetative cell, right? And what is the importance of vegetative cell? The vegetative cell is responsible for production of pollen tube. This vegetative cell germinates to form pollen tube, which carries the male gamete towards the female gamete. And what is the role of generative cell? This generative cell forms the male gamete, right? Then this cytoplasm is surrounded by the cell membrane or the plasma membrane. Clear? So inside the plasma membrane, the vegetative cell is present, inside which generative cell is floating, and the vegetative nucleus or the tube nucleus is present, which is irregularly shaped. Clear? And here remember, this cell cytoplasm inside the plasma membrane is dense, having high amount of reserve food. Clear? Whereas this generative cell, which is spindle shaped, have cytoplasm more or less hyaline, because having much less amount of reserve food. Clear? Then this pollen grain is surrounded by a 2-layer wall above the plasma membrane. The outer layer is known as exine and the inner layer is known as intine. The inner layer here you can see is a smooth continuous layer, and it is made up of cellulose and pectin. Remember, the intine, the inner wall layer, which is continuous, smooth and made up of cellulose and pectin, and the outer layer is known as exine, which is sculptured or some designs like spines, like rough surfaces, like oval, like circular outgrowths are present, right? So the exine is designed having a rough surfaces. Clear? Then this exine, the outermost layer, is made up of sporopollenin, which is the major constituent of it. And here the sporopollenin, mentioning sporopollenin is very important, because sporopollenin is the most hard organic substances, because it is not affected by any strong acid, alkali or any range of temperature. it is also not affected by any enzyme. So that means this, because of sporopollenin, enzyme becomes a protective layer to protect the pollen grain, and the sporopollenin is not affected by any adverse conditions or like strong acid, alkalis, temperature or any kind of enzyme attack, right? So this enzyme sometimes at certain places, here you see, at certain places enzyme doesn't contain sporopollenin. So there it remains thin, and this region is known as germ pore. So what is the importance of germ pore? The germ pore are the places where sporopollenin is absent. So the intine here, the vegetative cell and the intine germinates here in form of pollen tube, right? And the shape of the pollen grain may be spherical, oval, ellipsoidal, or it varies from plant to plants. It is of different shapes in different plants, right? So this is about the structure of a two-cell pollen grain. But sometimes what happens, sometimes means in about 40% of angiosperms, this is a two-cell pollen grain. After the formation of two-cell pollen grain, what happens? The generative cell undergoes mitotic division, right? So here you see generative cell undergoes or starts to divide by mitosis, and there is the formation of two haploid cells. So these two haploid cells are known as male gamete. Already I have mentioned generative cell is responsible for formation of male gametes. So now here you see the pollen grain consists of the vegetative cell having the vegetative nucleus, inside which two male gametes are present. That means the pollen grain here contains three cells, one vegetative cell, two male gametes. Clear? So in 40% cases, the pollen grain becomes three-celled, having two male gametes and one vegetative cell, and released from anther. Clear? Then the question arises in your mind that if in 40% cases the male gametes are formed, in rest 60% where the pollen grain is released in two-cell structure when the male gametes are formed. Right? So here you see when the two-cell pollen grain is released from the anther, that fall on the stigma. So when it is fall on the stigma, it absorbs certain nutritional fluid present in the stigma, and like this it germinates. That means the vegetative cell germinates to form a pollen tube through the germ pores. Now the vegetative nucleus and the contents migrate towards the tip of the pollen tube, and the generative cell also migrates to the pollen tube. Here the generative cell, with the formation of pollen tube or along with the formation of pollen tube, the generative cell undergoes mitosis to produce two male gamete. Here you see two male gamete. So that means in case of two-cell pollen grain releasing from anther produces male gametes when they fall on the stigma, absorbs nutrition and germinates to form pollen tube. Inside the pollen tube there is the formation of male gamete. So this is about the pollen grain. Then next is how these pollen grains are important. The pollen grains are important because they contain male gametes for the process of reproduction, that we know. Second thing, pollen grains are rich in nutrient. Clear? So pollen tablets and syrups are produced which are taken as food supplements. The pollen grains, the consumption of pollen grain claims to increase performance of athletes and racehorse, right? But still there are some disadvantages. What is the disadvantages? Sometimes some kind of pollen grains causes allergy, and in severe case it causes bronchitis, asthma, like respiratory disorders. One example here I would like to mention, Parthenium, that is an invasive weed whose pollen grain sometimes becomes very harmful to cause respiratory disorders and allergy. Clear? Then one more important thing regarding pollen grain, that is the viability, means the ability of the pollen grain to germinate and to produce male gamete, right? So this period, for what period the pollen grain retains its viability, is known as period of viability, which varies from plant to plant. In certain plants like cereals, the period of viability is about 20 minutes, whereas in some plants, for example the members of Rosaceae, Leguminaceae and Solanaceae, the viability is up to months. Clear? So the period of viability varies from plant to plant, and this period of viability, note down, depends on temperature and humidity. So these are the environmental factors which affects the period of viability. Then the question arises, if the period of viability in pollen grain remains less in different plant, then how the plant breeder can carry out the plant breeding program at any time in the year? So for their purpose, for the purpose of plant breeding, pollen grain can be preserved, right? So the pollen grain can be preserved or stored for years. How? In liquid nitrogen at minus 196 degree centigrade. And this method is known as cryopreservation, which is aimed to retain the viability and to be used later in crop breeding programs, right? So that is about the structure and the importance and the viability of pollen grain. So that's all. Thank you.